What's up, guys? This is Bull by the Fell-Handed, and welcome to Bull's Weak Spot Guide for the VK 100.01P. This is a very tough tank. It has been requested numerous times. Finally, I am able to get to it. Hopefully, going forward, I can get these weak spot guides out on a weekly basis. So, guys, let's get right into it without further ado. The vehicle I am going to use against this is the Type 59. Has a armor piercing round of 181 millimeters and a armor piercing composite rigid of 241 millimeters. And that is what I'm going to be shooting with. Now, frontally, this bad boy is very tough. Angled, it gets even worse. This is a very nasty tank, and you need to only engage frontally if you really have a lot of gun, if that makes sense. Okay, let's get right to it. We're going to focus right here on the lower plate. Lower plate is coming in at about 178 millimeters of effective thickness. So what that's going to do is, with 181 millimeters of penetration, that's going to be about a 50-50 shot. Granted, you could get more or less depending on how liked you are by the RNG gods. The upper plate is effective 304, so don't bother shooting at this unless you are a tier 10 tank destroyer running a very hot round. Now, even though the 181 millimeters of penetration that the Type 59 has is kind of above average for a lot of the tier 8 medium tanks, we don't really find a lot of weak spots on this bad boy. Now, I will tell you this, the gun on this thing is easily damaged. You can put a round in it, and that'll at least make, you know, the operator use a repair kit or suffer the accuracy penalties. Now, so far, looking at this bad boy straight ahead, unless you just happen to get a very high penetration roll with your standard AP round, you're not going to get anywhere unless you go for the lower plate. Angled, of course, is a whole different ball game. Now, when we switch to APCR, the entire tank opens up a little bit, not very much. It's not a crazy amount, but you know, there are a number of weak spots you can kind of focus on that, you know, will allow you to get somewhere. Now, even the commander's hatch there with your standard rounds, you're not really going to gain a lot of ground firing at it. Unfortunately, for the shooter, for the VK 100.01P operators out there, they're loving this thing. Now, of course, the sides of the turret there where I just fired, insane amount of armor, 450 millimeters of effective thickness just because of the slope. It's what's called a compound angle. I tried to sneak one in here to the tracks to kind of see if we had any weak spot action here. There's not a lot going on, so unfortunately, you know, you're not going to gain much headway into this bad boy firing from the front, even with, you know, some decent rounds. Of course, you know, once, like I said, you get into your premium rounds, you're going to really make some things happen. And once again here, we have a 50-50 shot of penetrating. The lower plate here, we seem to be one with RNG for now, but what else is new? Okay, so we are switching to APCR, and we're going to put a few rounds here in the upper plate. And, you know, as you've seen before, not a lot is going to happen. The lower plate, you know, as far as the penetration, you know, 241 versus the 186, it's going to go through more or less every single time. The upper plate, though, is still going to block us coming in the low 300s. So there's not a lot there that's going to happen. The sides of the turrets there that I was speaking of earlier, you know, nothing is going to happen there. The compound angles right here, it's just nothing is going to happen. I don't even think a tier 10 tank destroyer running a hot round could get through here. 50-50 is about as best as you could go. Now, directly to the left and right of the guns there where the cheeks are, you've got some good penetration chances right there, as well as the turret ring directly underneath the gun. You've got a lot of opportunity there to put a round through there and perhaps, you know, do some damage. But now keep in mind, the penetration chances are only 50-50 at this point. You know, you have just a little bit more gun than you do armor as far as the penetration goes. So, you know, there's no guarantee frontally that you can do anything to harm this big beast of a German tank. And as you can see right here, we're going to try to put one in the cheek there. We managed to pull that off, but just keep in mind, guys, it's not going to happen. Okay, so let's keep it moving. There's an area right around the gun you can penetrate, although it is so small and I've tried so many times I decided not to use the footage. It's just not going to happen. APCR, if you are facing this tank, is a must. Now, angled, this thing becomes even more impressive. This tank is just nigh invulnerable when it is angled properly. Now, properly means 22 degrees. That is your strongest angle. Now, if you go any more than that, you're either going to be losing armor in a given area. Now, we're going to put some rounds here on the lower plate. As you can see here, we're making some progress. The lower plate is still, pretty much an issue at this angle. Now, granted, of course, if you could somehow side scrape off something or keep the lower plate, covered for those VK operators, then you're going to have a lot of success, because the rest of the tank is very, very strong. Your upper plate still, as ridiculous, even more, 350 range. No chance to penetrate that. We're doing it for posterity. That's exactly what we're doing it for. The side of the turret is tough as well at this angle. You're not really going to have a lot of leeway as far as where to put your shots. I would even say if you see one of these things side scraping, driving around would probably be an excellent option. The side of the tank here, the lower end here, where the tracks are, kind of right below that bar you see running down the side, is in the 500 range, anywhere from 510 to 550. Further on in the back is an auto bounce. The upper side is kind of the weaker side, if that is such a thing, and it comes in from anywhere from 315 to 330, depending on how far back you go. Obviously, if you would want to penetrate it, you would want to go further to the left of the screen, because the shorter you are to the angle, the higher chance you have of penetration. I don't want to get super technical, but at the same time, I want to get my point across. So anyway, let's keep it moving. And not a lot here, guys. Even with a very, very hot round, I really doubt Tier 10 tank destroyers would even have any luck shooting the side of this thing, even with a heat round. Specifically being heat does not like angled armor. The side of the turret here, not getting a lot going on there. Very, very strong. Nothing really can be done at this point, especially running AP rounds. Even the cap there, just nothing. It's you could possibly sneak something in, but the chances are so remote, and you would have to roll so high on your penetration value that it's just not going to happen. You would be better served to use whatever luck to play the lottery instead. Now, moving on, we have APCR loaded, 241 millimeters penetration. We're still doing a lot of good work here on the lower plate. This seems to be our area. God forbid this thing pulls up against a rock or another dead tank. We are in trouble. Now, once again here, guys, the upper plate, very, very nasty. Nasty at any angle is actually what I want to go ahead and say. The only time you would be able to get up through that upper plate is if you were on a hill or something firing down into the upper plate. Then the angle would kind of cease to be, and then you would just literally be firing through the thickness of the plate itself, which comes in right at 200. So that would kind of be a thing. Okay, so moving on here. The side of the tank, guys, nothing's really going to happen. I mean, even at this angle, even with APCR, just nothing is happening. The VK operators out here probably love this, just simply for the fact that it kind of shows how strong this tank is, and I'm sure they know how strong this tank is. Not a lot of weak spots. Now, granted, of course, when you are running premium ammunition, a little bit of the turret ring kind of opens up there. You can sneak something in there. The cheek facing us is about a 50-50, maybe a little less there. So watch out for that. We did put one in the turret ring right there. The commander's hatch with premium rounds does open up as well. Unfortunately for us, though, the shooters, there's not a super amount of weak spots on this bad boy, even with APCR at this particular angle. Of course, this is the strongest angle of this tank. I'm going to show you here in a moment, over angled, what it looks like to help out the shooters as well as the operators out there, because I want everybody to do well. And moving on. As you can see here, guys, nothing is really happening here on the side of the tank. If you go up the side of the turret here, right about where we're shooting, you've got about a 33% chance to penetrate. So 1 out of every 3 rounds is going to go through. That is a lot of rounds to fire to make something happen. Okay, guys, so moral of the story is we don't want to spam APCR at the side of this tank, even angled, because a lot is not really going to happen for us, if that is a thing. It's a thing. I'm calling it a thing. Moving on. Now, over angled. 51 degrees makes this bad boy over angled, then a lot of things open up. So you have to be very careful for you operators out there. Now, granted, of course, 51 degrees is fairly obvious. It is more or less completely sideways. Now, that being said, you know, your lower plate there is still going to be very, very strong, except it's going to be more effective at this angle because it is extremely sloped. Now, that being said, though, the side of the tank kind of opens up. Now, I kind of stuck one right there in the side there. That is a little tiny weak spot. I try to hit it a few more times. I wouldn't bet the house on it. Obviously, if somebody's angled this much, over angled this much, I would put rounds into the side of the tank instead of this tiny, tiny weak spot. But if this is all you can see, then that's all you can shoot. So that is kind of your option. I just kind of essentially want to give you guys options, not necessarily good ones. I guess I want to give you all the options. How about that? Instead of just a few. Okay, so moving on. The front plate of this bad boy at this particular angle is just nigh ridiculous. In the 450s, 470 range, depending on where you hit it. This side of the tank, though, guys, is where we're really going to hit pay dirt. Now, the lower end here is still in the ridiculous zone, sadly, which is a bit odd. Where the tracks are, the upper plate is where you want to shoot. So above that line is where you want to fire versus the lower. The lower goes from, you know, auto bounce to the low, the high 200s, the low 300s. So it is still kind of ridiculous, which is a bit odd. Now the side of the turret here, still very, very tough. Not a lot is going to happen here, depending on where you hit, you know, depending on your penetration roll, what have you. You're not going to get to a decent roll until you get up to the front, right behind the mantlet there. A little to the left where I'm aiming right now, then you've got about a 30% chance of pinning. So even over angled, this thing is still a monster, which I'm sure the VK operators are in love with. Very, very tough tank. Not a lot is going to happen. Unless, of course, you switch to premium rounds. Then you're really in business. Now, of course, if you pull up with this thing in a light, in a medium tank, and get it a straight 90, then yeah, you can do some work. But if you aim below the water line there, which is what is the verbiage used on battleships, which is very accurate, that, you know, your armor is still insanely high. So just make sure to aim above that line on the side of the tank. If you aim below it, more than likely your rounds are going to bounce. If not, they're not going to do anything at all, which is even worse. So anyway, now as you see here, we're shooting APCR. Have a lot of rounds going through this bad boy, and instead, you know, the only major difference is the turret has opened up on this thing. The upper plate still bouncing everything we throw at it. The side of the tank we can get into here. The lower part, which I was talking about, so difficult to get through, is still not going to give us any love. Now the front of the tank here, the front of the side of the turret is going to be your best place to pin with APCR. The further back you go, you're getting into the 50-50 range because the armor on the side of the turret at this particular angle is still very, very strong. So just keep that in mind. Okay, guys, let's get into the side weak spots. Very, very tough. Still yet, no guaranteed penetration, sadly. The below the line right here is still insanely tough. I have no idea. They should have made the entire tank out of this armor right here, and we would all be set. We could all just drive these things all day and just shoot at each other, and nothing would happen. So anyway, just keep this in mind. The lower, below the little line right there, below the water line, is insanely tough. Even flat armored, it's around 200 millimeters of protection. So just keep that in mind. Now once we go above this, oh boy, we've hit pay dirt. Effective armor 136 in certain areas, so you can really put in some good work here. You can hit some good modules. Once we remove the angle from this bad boy, we get into some good shots here. We're really going to put some work in. Now granted, as far as the turret goes, the half of the turret to the rear is going to be about 50-50 as far as your shots penetrating. Once you get above the commander's hatch right there, you are going to go into nothingness. It's going to go from 1/4 to 10% to 0. So just keep that in mind. If you're firing at this thing from the side, you want to make sure you shoot the hull and not the turret, because the turret is still very, very tough. Going back to what I said earlier about damaging the gun, man, you can damage this gun easy. It's not a big deal. You can put any kind of rounds into it. It's going to really do a number on it. Okay, so going back to what I was saying here, as you can see, we're firing some rounds here on the side of this bad boy towards the front. And as you can see here, most everything is bouncing, not getting a lot of action. Now down here, like I said previously, we're going to have 50-50 chance, so keep that in mind. I had to slow-mo that because you know what? I got that 50% chance. So anyway, we knocked the turret off. A little bit of fun right there. Okay, moving on. Rear weak spots. Essentially just doing this for posterity here, guys. I just want you guys to know every single thing about this tank, where to shoot it, where not to shoot it. And so, let's get right into it. Lower plate to the rear here, a very viable target, as well as the upper here. This is the engine area. We'll get into that a little bit later. So just, a lot of open area here, as well as the turret. You have to be careful of the turret ring in the back, because it is a no-go. If your round deviates, hits the back of the turret ring, you're going to say, oh man, how in the world did that bounce? Well, you hit the turret ring. And the turret ring, at this particular angle is extremely strong. So is the top of the tank. If your round deviates, hits the top of the tank, you are going to not be in business. The commander's hatch there is only strong, it is strong on the left and the right, and the center is a 50-50 at best. Sometimes it's a little lower than that, so I would not necessarily recommend to go for the center of the commander's hatch, just due to the fact it's being a 50-50. As you can see here, I tried to hit the top of the weak spot there. Somehow we missed. That's okay. I've got another round here. It is a auto bounce area, so just keep that in mind. It is an auto bounce from this angle. Let me get very specific, because if you hit it somewhere else, it may not be an auto bounce. So that being said, if you're going to shoot this thing, you want to shoot it in the turret, the flat part of the turret, or the flat part of the rear hull. These are the places where you can fire on it and it will bounce, so just keep that in mind. You don't want to bounce unless you absolutely have to. This is the ammo loading hatch right there, and that is a very, very easy place to penetrate as well. So just keep that in mind. We finally put one through the commander's hatch. It wasn't easy, but we finally did it. Okay guys, let's get into modules. This will let you know where to shoot what. Okay guys, so modules. Right away here we have the cannon. You know what? I'm going to go through everything. And that's what that is. That's the cannon. Okay guys, right through here is your driver. Sits to the right as you face the tank. To the left of him is the radio operator. He sits right there. Of course, you would never get him through the upper plate because it is nigh impenetrable. Okay, so right here is your commander, noted by the gigantic commander's hatch right there. To the commander's side there sits the gunner. He's the one who operates that big massive cannon. Now let's go to observation device, of which this tank has many. We have one right here, and the 3 on top of the commander's hatch also count as observation device. It has one at the 6 o'clock as well. So lots of observation device. To the side here we have the driver, same location. Lots of ammo racks on this particular bad boy. We have one right here. We also have one in the turret. I'll get to that here in a moment. Up above here we have the commander's hatch here, sitting right there, and in the commander's hatch sits the commander. Directly to the commander's 6 o'clock we have the loader, and behind the loader we have another ammo rack. This is the ammo rack loaded to do battle. Obviously you wouldn't want to run on the bottom of the tank every time you had to grab a shell. Okay, so moving on. This thing has a ginormous fuel tank on the side of it. This is not a Toyota. This thing does not get very many miles per gallon, so gigantic fuel tank to power this gigantic beast. And at the very end of it we have some engine. Now granted, this engine is going to be more pronounced as we do the rear weak spot area. Okay, so let's go to the rear section here for modules. On either side of the hatch in the middle, the ammo loading hatch, we have ammo racks, as well as that observation device I was referring to earlier. The lower part of the hull is more or less going to be completely engine. You hit any area in here, you are more than likely going to hit the engine, assuming you roll the right number that you can't see. It's all down to RNG. So if you've played this game, you are very familiar with RNG, and that's exactly what it is. It determines whether or not you'll damage the engine. Guys, I hope everybody enjoyed Bull's weak spot guide to the VK100.01P. Hope it helps you guys in order to destroy this tank. And I hope it helps you operators in order to defend your tank and make it the best tank you can. Also, guys, don't forget February 1st is the cutoff for the interview with the tanker. If you'd like to be interviewed, put your gamer tag below and state as much. Also, if you'd have any Q&A questions, make sure to comment below, title them Q&A, and then your question, and then I'll write it all down. February 1st. Hopefully, ideally, we will get that going. Guys, I hope you enjoy. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you guys next time.